So, you want to go to Oxford or Cambridge? My name is Barbara and I graduated from Oxford in engineering earlier this year. I'm here today to give you some advice on how you can prepare for the 3 stages of getting into Oxford or Cambridge. These 3 stages are the personal statement, the admissions test and the interview. If you're interested in one of these stages in particular, you can skip to that part of the video using the timestamps in the description. Before we dive into these 3 stages, let's do some initial housekeeping. The first thing you should do is read the course page for your chosen subject on the Oxford or Cambridge website. These pages are definitely worth visiting because they will tell you all of the application requirements for your course, such as A-level or IB grade requirements or the equivalent exam you're going to be sitting, the admissions test that you'll need to do, and the structure of any interviews you may need to sit. Okay, now that that's covered, let's move on to part 1, the personal statement. Your personal statement should do 3 things. It should showcase why you've been attracted to the subject that you're applying for. It should showcase what you've done beyond your school curriculum to further your interest in that subject. And finally, it should show who you are outside of academia. There's definitely flexibility in terms of how you structure your personal statement, but a good guideline is to use the 3 points that I just mentioned to structure your paragraphs. For example, in my personal statement, I used 1 paragraph point 1, 2 paragraphs point 2, because this formed the bulk of my personal statement, and 1 paragraph for point 3. That's 4 paragraphs in total. To give you an idea of exactly what you can talk about in these 3 points, I'll tell you what I spoke about in mine. So bearing in mind, I applied for engineering, but you should be able to apply these philosophies to whichever personal statement you're writing. Point 1 is going to depend on your internal motivations for the subject. I talked about being interested in a blend between maths and physics and always having more passion for the applied side. For point 2, I spoke about a project that I completed in 6th form, which investigated the fluid mechanics of golf ball flight. I spoke about the engineering concepts that I investigated, which were beyond the scope of A-level physics and maths, as well as the resources and books that I used to find this information. I would highly recommend that you do not mention any books or resources that you're not familiar with, because this is something you could be asked about in an interview. For point 3, I spoke about my achievements in golf, which was the main thing that I was pursuing at the time outside of academia. And I also spoke about my school responsibilities and other general interests and hobbies. I'd recommend you talk about something you're passionate outside of the classroom, and if you have any accolades in that area, definitely mention those. In point 3, you're looking to showcase any traits that you have developed as an individual that will help you excel inside the classroom, but just as importantly, will help you be a great member of society at a university. Admissions tests. Once you've figured out which admissions test you need to sit for your subject, you can start preparing. The admissions test will have a threshold score that you will need to get the same as or higher than in order to guarantee yourself an interview. For example, in the physics aptitude test, which I had to sit for engineering, in the year that I sat it, all candidates who scored 62 or above were automatically given an interview. There are some exceptions to this rule, so students who have exceptional applications in other areas or mitigating circumstances may be able to score a little bit lower than this threshold and still get an interview, but this is something that you're going to want to check specifically for your course, which you can find in the reports of admissions tests from previous years. We're going to look at 3 aspects of admissions test preparation today. Firstly, using the syllabus. Secondly, using past papers. And thirdly, how to reflect on questions that you do for practice. The first thing that you should do is have a read through the syllabus of the admissions test that you're going to be sitting. These can be found on the course page that I mentioned earlier. The syllabus isn't going to be extremely thorough for every single subject, but it's going to give you a great overview of the topics that you need to know, which is a good starting point. Once you know which topics you need to be familiar with for your test, you should go back to your A-level or IB or 6th form equivalent exam board and start preparing those topics. The difference with A-levels and these admissions tests is that you do really need to be comfortable with everything on the syllabus. You can't afford to be slightly weaker in one area and make it up in another, because it's really hard to predict which topics are going to come up in the test. The best way to cover all bases is to try and be prepared for everything. Use your A-level textbooks, practice the hardest questions from each chapter, and stretching yourself right to the edge of your syllabus is going to be in line with what you're going to see in the submissions test. Past papers are ultimately going to be your best resource. You should aim to complete every question from every past paper ahead of your admissions test. This sounds like a lot, and it is, but you want to be as prepared as possible. Some past papers will have mark schemes on the Oxford and Cambridge website, but some of them don't. And this is where you're going to have to turn to other resources. Finding a mark scheme for your admissions test may be as simple as typing in the name of the admissions test on Google plus mark scheme. There's a lot of informal mark schemes out there, which I found really helpful when I was preparing, so I'm sure you can find the same for your test. Finally, how you use these past papers beyond just doing the questions is really important. You should be reflecting on every single question that you do and giving yourself feedback. You won't get every question right that you do, and to be honest, you don't need to, because the pass mark for these admissions tests is usually somewhere between 50 and 70. You won't get every question right in practice, and that's okay, but you should definitely aim to understand the solution to every single question. Using some sort of structure for this is really important. So I'll put it up on the screen right now, but when I was doing this, I used a Google Sheet to track every question that I did. I'd mark the questions into 3 categories. 1, if I got the question correct. 2, if I got the question wrong, but I understood the solution. And 3, if I got the question wrong and I didn't understand the solution. Now, the ones you want to focus on are those category 3 questions. You need to figure out some way of understanding them. The way I did this is I would talk to my peers, I talked to my teachers at the end of lessons, and I'd use the internet forums just to find a way to understand the solution to every single question. If you're looking at the sheet on the screen, you want to turn every one of those red boxes into a yellow one by the end of your preparation. I would highly encourage you to time yourself when you're doing questions for practice. It's very important to learn how to allocate time appropriately to all the different questions in the paper. It's also really important to know if you should give up on a question and move on and try and get more marks elsewhere rather than staying and being stuck on that question. And finally, the interview. If you get this far, congratulations. You should be really proud of yourself for this alone. We're going to look at 3 aspects of interview preparation. Firstly, personal statement and course questions. Secondly, technical questions. And thirdly, delivery. Personal statement and course questions are the first type of questions you could be asked. And if you're asked them, they'll likely be at the start of the interview. This includes questions such as, why do you want to go to Oxford or Cambridge? Why do you want to study your chosen subject? What makes you feel that you're suited to the academic challenge of these universities? If you've mentioned a book or a project in your personal statement, be prepared to talk about this as well. The best way to prepare for these types of questions is to bullet point some answers to the really obvious questions. So things like why you want to go to the university and why you want to do that subject. And then in terms of questions about your personal statement, I'd recommend you go through your personal statement sentence by sentence and think to yourself at each point, what's a question that I could be asked on this sentence? And by the end of your personal statement, you'll have probably come up with 10 to 20 questions, maybe more, maybe less. And you should bullet point and think of what you could say in an answer to that question. Now, this is important. You do not need to rote learn answers to these questions. And in fact, I would really advise against that because it will sound too rehearsed. But you should have a rough idea of what you would say to any given question. Now, it's unlikely that the exact wording of the question is going to be what you anticipated. But if you have prepared for a similar question, you're going to be way more comfortable in the interview setting. The truth is, these types of questions are not as commonly asked because there is more emphasis on the technical questions. But trust me, it's well worth preparing for these because firstly, if you do get asked, you want to be able to give a good answer to start off your interview. And secondly, just knowing that you're prepared to answer these types of questions ahead of your interview will definitely ease your nerves going into it. The second aspect is technical questions. These questions will comprise the bulk of your interviews, and they essentially test your technical knowledge by stretching you to the edge of your school syllabus. In many cases, you'll be stretched beyond your syllabus as well, but in those situations, the interviewer will guide you through the question. It's impossible to predict the exact type of question that you're going to be asked, but the skill that you should try to practice ahead of technical questions is how to grapple with a really complex problem where the initial first few steps aren't clear. This sounds scary, but this skill is highly trainable, and the way you can train it is simply by doing lots of these types of questions. In school, typically the types of questions you do are quite formulaic. You know what the approach is, you know what the equation you need for that question is, and then you do the question. With interview style questions, the initial step is not going to be very clear. And once you spot it, the question will then be okay, but it's spotting that first step which is the challenge. This is obviously very foreign to most students, so simply becoming more familiar with it is a great way to improve. There are tons of online resources for Oxford and Cambridge interview technical questions for your chosen subject. If you just do some searching on Google and other student forums, you can find lots of great resources. For each course, there are different types of technical questions. So for example, in engineering, there are really 3 types of questions. Graph sketching questions are very common, estimation questions are very common, such as how many Mars bars do you need to eat in order to climb Mount Everest? And then thirdly, just technical questions which are based off what you're doing at A level, but they're just like a harder version. So try to identify what types of questions you may see in the technical part of the interview for your course. And you should be able to decipher this pretty easily just by looking through online past interviews. Finally, delivery. It's really important to be able to answer both of the types of questions that we've looked at so far, but what's equally as important is knowing how to relay those answers in an interview environment where you're probably going to be a bit nervous and there's going to be some pressure. One thing that you can do before all of the steps that I'm about to mention is to go ahead and watch mock interviews on YouTube. There's some really great mock interviews which will just give you a bit of an insight into the structure that you can expect of your interview and show you how interviewers are looking for you to deliver your answers. There's hopefully one coming soon from this channel, so stay tuned. In the meantime, here's a few tips that you can focus on to really enhance your delivery. The first thing you want to do is focus on talking slowly. When you're in an interview situation and you're a bit nervous, you tend to talk a lot faster. Slowing down will make what you're saying more clear to the interviewer, and it will also give you more time to think. Number 2, think out loud. The interview serves as an opportunity for you to show the university tutors how good a student you would make. What this means is that you don't need to answer everything correctly. More importantly, you need to show that you're really good at displaying your thought process whilst solving a problem to a tutor, and that you're receptive to guidance and feedback during that process. Ultimately, the tutors who interview you will be your tutors if you're accepted into the university, and so you want to show them that you're a very teachable student. The only way that you can do this is to get good at thinking out loud. What this means is talking the interviewer through every stage of the problem that you're tackling. Even if you're unsure what to do, voice whatever you can that is relevant to the question. Voicing this will be a good starting point, and it will help the interviewer to guide you along the problem and help you reach the answer. This is actually a big misconception of Oxbridge interviews. People often think the interviewer is trying to trick you, but it's actually the opposite. They will often be trying to help you get towards the answer, so it's important to know that when you go in. Finally, practice, practice, practice. The best way to get comfortable in an interview setting is by replicating it as much as possible. Find whoever you can to ask you interview-style questions in an interview setting. Friends, family, or your teachers if they have time. The important part is just getting really comfortable talking someone else through a problem that you're tackling. For most people, this is something that you've never had to do up to this point because exams are usually silent. But this is a skill that you really need to develop if you're going to do well at interviews. I would apply the same philosophy to your personal statement questions. Even though these are something that you may have rehearsed in your mind or you've bullet pointed answers to, you don't want the first time that you actually give an answer out loud to be in your interview. So practice in front of a mirror, practice with friends, family, whoever you can. And that concludes all of the advice from this video. Applying to Oxford or Cambridge is definitely a daunting journey, but it's a very exciting one. For most of you, it will be the first time that you're preparing for something where the route to success is not clearly defined. And you may feel lost scouring through the internet looking for resources, but just know that every bit of preparation that you're doing is probably helping in some kind of way. Give it everything you have, and I wish you all the best. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more similar videos coming soon. Drop a comment to let me know your thoughts and to let me know if there's any types of videos that you would like to see coming up soon. I'll see you guys soon.